Moving on, Galatasaray's impressive victory over Ajax, 3-0. Shouldn't have been a surprise to you, Andy, should it?
Well, I guess the win over Ajax in isolation, no, because Ajax, as we recently discussed on here, are absolutely in the mud at the moment. But I think what's really impressive is Galatasaray, and since that 5-1 defeat at Eintracht Frankfurt on the opening night, we think, oh, here we go again. You know, a team that has proved again and again that they've really got no equal in the Turkish Super League, and they've built up an enviable squad. I can't get it right on the big nights in the Champions League. They can show promise, and then it all falls to bits. And the way it fell apart in Frankfurt on the opening night was really alarming. But I think it's almost like Leeds 4-0 defeat in Barcelona going back to 2000, 2001. Do you remember when they got to the semi-finals? The opening night humiliation that said, right, okay, let's get the big boy pants on. And since then, 3 successive wins, obviously the one against Liverpool, and not just the fact that they beat Liverpool, but the way that they beat Liverpool, the maturity that they showed, has really allowed them to move on from here. I guess like the obvious headline, Lars, is the fact that Victor Osimhen is doing what Victor Osimhen was always meant to do: score a ton of goals for Galatasaray in the Champions League and look absolutely unplayable. But I think the way that they've managed games in these last 3 fixtures has been really interesting. If we're looking at them as, well, now we have to look at them as a possible contender for the top 8, I think, because they're in 9th at the moment, only out of the top 8 on goal difference.
Yeah, for me, as someone who's not more of a casual observer of Turkish football, I don't know it as in-depth as you do, as the listeners will appreciate. There are 2 things that I think about with Galatasaray. The first thing is, in this game against Ajax, Ajax are terrible at the moment, and Heitinga is going to get fired any minute, but you watch the first goal, and it's Leroy Sané hitting in a brilliant cross for Osimhen, who makes a really clever movement, stays onside, scores. And you're just thinking, these are superstars, these two. You know, Leroy Sané, okay, can be inconsistent, but he's just 29. Like, he's not 35. He's someone who still has the talent and the skill to play for one of the very, very, very biggest clubs in Europe. And they've managed to entice him to go to Istanbul. And Osimhen the same. Osimhen could play centre forward for almost any team in Europe. Like, he would improve. I'm not sure there's... Maybe City because they already have Erling. Maybe Real Madrid because I'm not sure how him and Mbappe would work together. Maybe Barcelona because Lewandowski has a little bit of gas left in the tank, and maybe Bayern because Harry Kane's brilliant. But aside from those, I think Osimhen would improve every team in the world, and he's at Galatasaray. Like that, and that feels like a change. Like this is not just them. There's them using this enormous status that they have in Turkey and the genuine financial muscles they somehow seem to have. I don't quite understand how that works under the hood, but it apparently does work. And attracting players who, like, this is not retirement league stuff anymore in the way it was in the past, when maybe like they've had someone like Wesley Sneijder go there, they've had Didier Drogba go there, but at a slightly different stage of their careers, I think it's fair to say. These are superstars right now who are there. And the other thing I would like to say about Galatasaray is that game against Liverpool, I did not think they had in them at all, because we went... we've seen them plenty of times. Like, this is a team that is geared towards absolutely thumping teams in the Turkish league in front of that very enthusiastic audience that they have, who can play good attacking football. But they've been a bit wild. I mean, we've said this on the pod before. It's Lucas Torreira is the guy who's the adult in the room in midfield. It's not what you want, really, when you're playing against very, very good teams. So when they actually managed to hold Liverpool and be defensively solid, and as you said, Andy, mature in that game, that kind of gets my attention, because that's not... I'm not surprised they've beaten Bodo Glimt on a day when Bodo Glimt were not great. I'm not surprised they've beaten an Ajax team that is kind of disintegrating before our eyes, and surely Johnny Heitinga cannot stay on there for much longer. These things are not surprising to me, but holding Liverpool, even a Liverpool in semi-crisis, I think is a very, very big surprise. And I do wonder if maybe this is the year Galatasaray mean business in Europe.
Yeah, I think Lars makes a compelling argument, though, that Galatasaray aren't the whipping boys. They shouldn't be, not with the superstars that they've got. You know, Victor Osimhen is the leading scorer in the Champions League at the moment. However, when they faced Monaco and Atletico Madrid, are they facing those two teams at the right time then, Andy? Because, you know, those two teams haven't quite fired off themselves. for them to progress further.
Well, before that, they have Union Saint-Gilloise in Istanbul, who you would expect them to put away. They win that, they're up to 12 points. And at that point, you're really playing with house money. I think they can go and win in Monaco, which would be the next match after that. And then, as you say, Atletico Madrid will not fancy a trip to Rams Park. They just won't. And then that last game that Galatasaray have away at Manchester City, like, who knows what Team City put out? Because I would imagine that City are going to be home and hosed by then. So I think it looks really, really good for them. But I think in terms of once they've got that 12 points in the bag, that they're in a position where the fear of failure is removed. Because that, I feel, is what has been the case for Galatasaray in previous times in the Champions League. And remember, they haven't been in the Champions League frequently in the last 5 or 6 years. You know, there was no Turkish team in the Champions League at all last season, because they went out in the playoff round against Young Boys, which was pretty disastrous for them, especially after the transfer window that they were having. And then the season before, they entertained us against Manchester United twice, and yet them and United both got edged out by Copenhagen in the end. So, which looks even more remarkable when you look at this week's results and where Copenhagen were at against Tottenham, even though clearly they've got a lot of injuries at the moment and a weaker team than that they did have 2 years ago. So I think it is the most important thing, that sense of confidence that comes from being able to manage the games. I mean, Lars is absolutely right in that the Liverpool game is a marker. But I would go to that game against Bodo Glimt as well, because you look at that and they go 3-0 up, fine, and then they concede 1 goal. And there's a little bit of a wobble, but they managed to sort it out. And I think when you go back a couple of seasons, when they last qualified for the Champions League, in the playoff round against Molde, they were really lucky. They looked all over the place for a lot of that game, even though they've got better players, like a lot better players, and a humongous budget compared to Molde. You know, they nearly made a proper mess of it. I think you look at the game that we went when we went and did our film for the OTC YouTube last season. Lars, they're playing a Dynamo Kiev team who've got far lesser resources than them. They're all over them, and they managed to not win the game, despite the fact they have like 4 or 5 times as many chances. Yeah. And I think really we can kind of underrate the coach here, Okan Buruk, who I really rate, who's got a reputation for really attacking football. But I think the thing that we have to remember about Okan Buruk is when he was playing for Inter in his playing career, because he is someone who is a lot more cosmopolitan than a lot of giants of Turkish football. I think you're really starting to see that, actually. Maybe this is the point that he starts to say, okay, this is a squad of really good players, and as you say, some of those players are top level players in their prime, which has maybe not been a feature of Turkish football in the past. But maybe Buruk is the man to govern them, and maybe this will make clubs think twice in the future when they could go and get a Jose Mourinho or someone like that. That actually having someone who knows the league, but is someone who's a little bit more worldly as well, kind of helps.
Yeah, this whole segment, Andy, is making me think I need to go back to Istanbul and watch football again.
I mean, let's eat as well. Let's eat.
Let's do it. Let's do a repeat of our trip next year at some point. It's got to happen, Andy.
Don't forget your friends back home, yeah, when it comes to eating.
You're invited, Dotun. You can come to Istanbul with us.
Just bring back the halva as you did last time. We'll be happy.
Tremendous.